Good afternoon to you and a warm welcome to EPTV, and we're streaming live now on YouTube and Facebook. It's great to have you along with us. Don't forget you can subscribe to EPTV for all great horsey content, not just in the world of racing, but across the whole equestrian world as well. There's content being provided every week by the EPTV team, and subscription is completely free. Now, for the next 25 minutes, half an hour or so, we've got to be talking about something that could really float your boat, because racing in 2025, racing in 5 years' time, where will we be? Particularly at the moment as we're coming out or going through a bit of a crisis in 2020. It's almost hard to know what we're going to be doing in 5 weeks' time, let alone 5 years' time. But I'm delighted to welcome two men who are steeped in experience in horse racing in different ways as well. First of all, we can welcome Josh Apiafi. Josh started his racing life as a stable lad for Martin Pipe and an amateur rider. He then joined the Betfair team when it was in its infancy. And then after that, he moved on to becoming the chief executive of the Professional Jockeys Association. And up beyond that, he founded Rewards for Racing, which was the loyalty program for racegoers back in 2011. And more recently, he's been part of the team that bought the Tote in 2019, the 100 million payout to buy the Tote into the Alizetti team there. And Josh is now not only an advisor to them, but he's also a presenter of Sky Sports Racing as well. He's got a busy schedule. And I'm also delighted to welcome Rod Street. Rod has been involved in horse racing at the top level now for a long time. He's the chief executive officer of the British Champion Series. That's the series of racing which culminates in Champions Day at Ascot, of course, all the best British racing across the calendar on the flat. And he's in charge of Great British Racing as well, which is racing's promotional and marketing tool. Welcome to you, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, pal.
Good to see you, Mike.
You're keeping well in the current environment, and plenty to think about, no doubt, even for 2020, let alone what it's going to be like in 2025.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I think everyone's adapted to this lockdown and have found strategies to cope with it. We're probably going to talk about this quite soon in the conversation about how technology right now, right here, is keeping us together, and there must be opportunity in that, which we can talk about later on. But yeah, all good here, Mike. Looking forward to the resumption of racing when that's permitted and when it's safe, but we're missing it terribly, aren't we?
We are, Rod, but knowing you as I do, I'm delighted you're on this particular show, because I know that you will make something sound good and promising and hopeful, because that's just the nature of you, isn't it? You always see the bright side.
Well, I try to, yeah, absolutely. I think it's important at this very challenging time that I don't look deluded either. So I think we know there is a lot of challenge for racing right now, and I think we're all agreed the first priority is that we get racing back behind closed doors safely and permissibly, and demonstrate that we can. And then I think as the month goes on and as the year goes on, we can actually start thinking about the future. But there will be a future. Racing is many hundreds of years old and steeped in history. It isn't going to disappear. And so it's interesting today, and Josh mentioned this before we came on air, that we've got this opportunity just to kind of play around with it a bit and have a chat and to hypothesize. So why not?
Yeah, Josh, we could learn lessons from what we're going through right now. There's no question about that.
Absolutely. And I think the sport, everything will look different. The new norm, I think, is the new phrase that politicians and everybody else are talking about. In other words, there will be change, and that's what the new norm will look like. It will, you just only have to look at how racing has been funded and structured, and a lot of that is around bookmaker shops and the demise of bookmaker shops, not only through COVID-19 and where we are now through the FOBT slashing of stakes last year. It's completely different. So the funding models of racing are changing. So the fixture list has got to change. You look at France, they have races at Deauville jumping off at 9:30 in the morning. That isn't for people in Deauville. That's because they've got an international revenue stream coming in from the Far East. So structuring our sport, and what I'm also very conscious of, and I'm going to sort of start this one off, is that we've had lots and lots of ideas that all three of us have been part of throughout the years, and we've heard them all from Premier Racing to restructuring all this. But actually, at the time, they might not have been right. But for me, it's always good to go back and look that the market has changed and the world has changed, and perhaps now's the time that's right. So always make sure that the market is ready for when you do make change or bring something about. We've only seen in the last 24 hours that the company that you mentioned that I worked for from when they were small old Betfair, we bought a tiny little business called Flutter. Now, all of a sudden, a multi-billion-pound business called Flutter owns Betfair and it owns the Stars Group, all announced over the last 24 hours. So it's looking at, you can take something from the past and bring it forward. And I think one of the things I would love to see, so this is where I'm going to start things off and throw it to you guys, is looking at how what we do in terms of both ticketing and how we structure our meeting. Because I currently think we're very, very complicated. And as much as Rod's team is trying to demystify racing for the masses, we have got over 600 racecourse different tickets that you can buy currently across our sport. And I believe in 5 years' time, there should be 4 or 5 of your, and call it what you want, be it your first class, business class, premium economy and economy. You know what you're going to get when you buy those tickets across the board. You can come onto a single platform and go and buy them rather than having to head off to 52 different websites that we've currently got. And it simplifies it. I can go to McDonald's in Azerbaijan and buy a Big Mac, large fries and a cheeseburger, and it's exactly the same as if I was buying it in London. And currently, if I go to Cheltenham, I buy a club ticket. If I go to Aintree, I have to buy a Lord Darsbury stand ticket or whatever. And who knows? I know who Lord Darsbury is, but it's a small minority. So I really hope we simplify what our offering is to the fan base in the next 5 years.
I think the McDonald's in Azerbaijan is the only one still open at the moment as well, Josh.
With social distancing.
Yeah, I think, and this conversation's been coming a while now, I think there needs to be a conversation about the different types of racing we have on offer. And we're a very passionate sport, and we often get caught up in the conversation about things being better or worse, as opposed to thinking about them being different and serving a different purpose. I think there are, if you like, premium meetings with some of the best quality racing that might be at the most customer-friendly times, at weekends and evenings, that can be promoted in a certain way. And it might be where much of your top quality racing takes place, and that you promote that to a wider public, because I think the wider public instinctively always want to know what's best, regardless of any sport. They just gravitate to who are the best practitioners. But there is an opportunity to put on racing at different times, which is serving another purpose. And we're seeing at the moment, aren't we? It's really, really interesting. That desire to get back to racing is driven by the fact that we know we can immediately start generating revenue streams behind closed doors racing through gaming. And so that is kind of putting a real focus on punters at the moment, and not just necessarily punters here in the UK, but punters around the world. So I think there is a conversation about that, and that the structure of the sport might look different in 5 years' time, with different types of racing taking place at different times, but all contributing to the ecosystem of racing. And because we're interdependent, we all need one another. So I agree with you. And yes, to do some work on demystifying the consumer offer would be a remarkable thing in relation to enclosures and ticket offers, Mike.
Yeah, actually, that's something that you might, watching at home, would be thinking that we could perhaps improve upon. We'd love to hear your thoughts by this. If you're watching us live, with fingers crossed that you are on YouTube and on Facebook, please feel free to give us your thoughts and your questions to Josh and Rod. It would be great to hear from you. I think ultimately, gents, though, where we are now, there's no question that in 2025, 5 years down the line, we'll still be recovering from the fallout of what's going to be an economic recession once we're out of what we're calling this lockdown phase and beyond. There's going to be a massive knock-on effect, which the next generation could end up paying for a long, long time. And it'll have its effect on horse racing. Do you see there being a sort of a cull of the professionals being involved, if you like, the training fraternity? Can you see that being shrunken by what's going on here? Because a lot of people are under tremendous pressure. Will there be a sort of a smaller band of trainers going forward into the future? And do you see trainers perhaps sharing the responsibilities both from a training and a business level as they do, for example, in Hong Kong or Australia?
Wow. there's a good few questions there to answer.
Let's get it going.
As a landborn man, and probably a horseman more so than anything, I'll pick away on a couple of those and let Rod grab away at those as well. I do think that there will be a significant change in 5 years' time in terms of how horses are trained. At the moment, and I'm fortunate enough to own a couple of horses. It's £20,000 a year, and I own them in partnership before we say anything else. And it's £20,000 a year to have a horse in training. It's a significant chunk of change. Now, why is that? It's very labour intensive having a horse in training. And if you look at the way the states run, where they train horses on a track, all of our horses are trained, their own stables. You've got your training centres, but nowhere near. It's not trained at they're not, put the right word, they don't come together and negotiate together. They all pay different prices for bedding, for shoeing, for, there's no one coming together actually grabbing it and saying, how can we make this cheaper for the owner? Is it better in terms of, at the moment they go out at 6 in the morning till 12 and then 4 till 6 are their working hours? Is there a better way of structuring that that's more labour friendly to bring the cost down of having a horse in training? Because there are people that are going to drop away that can't afford it. So we need to make sure that we can start making this a lot more affordable. Now, syndicates is one way that everyone talks about, but no one's found the real silver bullet. But I think getting away of horses being trained, and the last time there was a training revolution was Martin Pipe in 1990, or the late 80s, was the way he completely changed the way horses were galloped and trained. And I think Rod alluded to it at the top of the show. Technology could play a huge part in this, in terms of both on course and training at home, proper use of heart rate monitors as technology prices come down, as we know, as they get older. Heart rate monitors, weighing of horses, being in their close proximity to the gallop. Only in Lambourne we've got a what's called, I'm not sure what it's called, but you can canter horses. So basically a walker that canters horses around, and you can have 20 on it at a time. I'm not saying that's the solution, but equally there are going to be more technology solutions that hopefully bring down the price of having horses in training, which can keep hopefully the levels of horses in training, which is probably one to pass back to Rod now, because are we at the right level for the fixture list, or is it that the horses are going to drop, fixtures are going to drop?
Well, there's a correlation between the two. So supply of horses will absolutely influence the fixture list. And I think we have to be realistic. The reason many owners are able to own horses and pursue a great passion of theirs is because they have the resources to do so. And that's about having successful, profitable businesses. So if we are in a sharp downturn, it has to have an impact on many owners. The really big breeding operations maybe are a bit more immune to it in the short term, but I think largely the economy has a huge factor on your ability to participate. So I think the sport's got to be thinking about why people participate and how they keep them engaged. And something we're looking ahead that is a current cause of concern to me, but then also something to consider as an opportunity is, if at the moment you're an owner and your business is struggling and you're furloughed staff and you're thinking about what the next few years like, and you're trying to balance that against your passion and desire to be involved in racing, yet you can't even see your horses run, we've got a real challenge. That ability, racing behind closed doors, great to get the sport going again, but for many owners, you're taking away their opportunity to do the bit they really love, that brilliant social interaction. And added to that, breakfast with the trainer, the morning on the gallops, and all the events that the racing puts on. So I think we've got to think about those motivations as to why people are involved. It can't be largely financial. We know that it's an 8% return on average that people get on their horses. So we know that people are not in racing largely to make money. I do think the participation is absolutely vital for them. So I think racing and race courses has got to be thinking about the owner experience and enhancing that and making that a real key part of their strategy going forward. And of course, that leads us to ways that you can make racing more affordable, and that has to be syndicates. A challenge, of course, there, because the syndicate model is fantastic and they need to be run efficiently and run transparently, but it's the way you can get a much broader audience involved by making it accessible and affordable. But right now, the facilities on many race courses have not been designed for that. They've been designed much more for the sole or the dual owners or the small partnerships. And so there aren't currently consumer facilities across the 60 race courses that would match a desire to grow the syndicate population, to keep the number of horses high in training. So there's something that within, couched in a big challenge, is an opportunity for the sport to embrace and think about the customer, the owner. I mean, something that's going to come out of this crisis is, and it's good that it's really focused the mind, is there are two really important players in our game, amongst a lot of important people: punters and owners, people who bet on the sport and create the income, and people who provide and pay for the product. And I think most of us know that there is an interdependence between the two, and these conversations about better or worse or who's more important are horribly misleading. The reality is they need one another, and I think that the punter and the owner should come out of this as more influential.
Yeah, it's a good point, Rod. I also think we should also mention the breeders as well, because there's an argument that the horse population, what is it in the UK at the moment, between 12 and 14,000 racehorses around, of which maybe 4,000 or 5,000 get retired and get replaced by the oncoming next generation. But there's a big argument that perhaps when we are to crystallize and move it forward more efficiently, that there are too many horses being bred, and that we should start to look at maybe a way of encouraging not breeding from mares that haven't produced the success that they perhaps could have done. There's an awful lot of, I can never remember any stallion farm turning down a covering opportunity, put it that way, and maybe we should be looking at that and give some financial incentive to retire certain old mares that perhaps aren't doing the job that they should be doing.
I'll throw one at you from the sideball on the same conversation. Really, here is that who makes the money out of having runners at a track, and that's a race course. So why aren't race courses, or in 5 years' time, will race courses own a set of horses and have them at the track, so they guarantee their runners? They get paid more when it ups from 7 to 8 runners, and when it ups from, I think, from 12 to 14. There's different ones in there where their money goes up. There is definitely an algorithm there that says if we have enough horses, or we target, let's say, mares to run in mares races to up those numbers, and then they get paid more for those media rights just there. So every race course is like the Hong Kong Jockey Club own horses that they then run at their track, and they sell whatever percentage to owners. So do you get things like ARC or the Jockey Club owning a set of horses and syndicating, let's say, 50% of each horse out, but they run solely at their tracks, so it then helps them get their media rights money. Punters still have something to bet on. So it's it's like Rod says, I think that what we're talking about now is the ecosystems just trying to it's got an opportunity to correct itself over the 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very, very true, which is what I was going about the production of the horses at the base of it, Rob. That's a great suggestion. And I think that there's almost, I cannot see there being less syndicates around in horse racing in 2025 than there are now. I think there's an opportunity to get this really moving over the next few years or so, and bring more people into the game, and perhaps encourage trainers, and the younger brigade certainly do this, of being more transparent about their training methods. I mean, they're using their social media platforms and their websites, aren't they, to show how horses are trained these days. And it's something that James Savage got in touch with us before we started broadcasting today. He's head lad at Sir Michael Stout's, and he would like to have been on the show, but he's busy doing evening stables at the moment with the boss. But he's saying that it's most important to engage with the public as to how horses are trained and prepared, and be open about it. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, that was never heard of, was it? Everything was very private. And unless you had a good share in a horse, you weren't entitled to see any of that, and never would be seeing any of that. You'd be shown the door very, very quickly, wouldn't you?
Well, we live in a world now where we bear all on virtually every platform. So people, consumers, are used to transparency and access.
Whatever you're into, Rod, by the way.
I noticed you and I both just tweeted something from our garden earlier on for racing welfare. We're always doing it, aren't we? So I think people do demand that level of transparency, and it's and it should be seen as a great opportunity for trainers to bring more people in. And there will always be people that you're exposed to racing, those once a year customers that kind of enjoy it but never kind of get hooked by it. That's a fact of life, in the same way that every sport has its fans and those that aren't keen on it. But I do know that if you get enough people involved in racing, a decent number will kind of get that bug, and that magic will rub off on them. And that isn't just about the jolly day at the race course, which is a crucially important part of it, but it's about getting someone on the gallops, taking someone to a yard first thing in the morning, getting people up close and personal with the horses. They're fantastic experiences. And of course, in parallel with that, a different subject, but one that you can also use as an opportunity, is to tell the horse welfare story better.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, this has been discussed on many occasions. So again, if you're talking about 5 years' time, where can racing be? I hope that the Horse Welfare Board strategy, which was launched just before this awful pandemic, I mean, in terms of timing, it couldn't have been worse in getting things on the go, that this strategy is not left behind. And I believe it's the case that isn't the case. People are very committed to it. And the sport in 5 years' time has done a better job of telling its story. And I worry not too much about racing's detractors at one end of the spectrum, because they are what they are. In the same way, I worry less about our advocates, because they understand us and they're on board. So I don't think I've got to do. I'm wasting my energy trying to persuade someone animal aid about horse racing. In the same way, I don't need to persuade you and Josh that it's great. Yeah. In the middle, you've got a much bigger number of people who are simply indifferent to racing, because they don't know much about it and they've never been exposed to the equine world. That's where I'd like us to focus our attention in the coming years, and get more people coming to one side of the spectrum to support the sport and to give us that continued social license to race. And so there's opportunity there.
It's all about education, Rod, isn't it, really? And in fact, this Bridget Ross has just emailed to us. She's basically, you've answered her question in advance effectively. She's saying that with jump racing pretty much a non-starter in Australia and the US racing world in significant decline, because they've been influenced by the ever-growing anti-racing brigade, I wonder what can be done here to avoid treading a similar path. Because we are in the spotlight, aren't we, for this anti-cruelty and all this, and the welfare issue is going to be enormous. It won't go away, but the more we educate people, as you suggest, Rod, the better I think that people understand what it's all about.
Totally agree. Josh, what would you add to
that? Two things. So I'll come back to the welfare issue. I'll take on Rod's analogy there in terms of our passionate race goers, the detractors over here. How are we going to reach the middle? And it's the old classic marketing. The best marketing you do is refer a friend. And we don't have any real proper refer a friend programs where it comes to ownership, where it comes to even going racing. We don't have any tour operators even in Lambourne, where I speak. Every time I take someone up the gallops here, they just can't believe the access that you could have and sit and talk to the likes of Oliver Sherwood or Jamie Snowden and whoever. You'll probably get a chance to be in Jamie Osborne's video if you were here at the right time. But you know, those kind of things is I can do that, and I go and sell it to my friends. But there needs to be an incentive for people to go, okay, if you come into my syndicate, but you bring in 2 other people, well, then you can get your share for free next year. And spreading the love by the people, the passionate people over here. It's like a little closed shop. This is our little club, and we've got to open up this little club to the masses. And it probably goes all the way back from when we were growing up, long time ago. And Dick Francis novels. It's all a little bit cloak and dagger and a little punt going on a horse. It's, you know, whereas the new trainers now, as you alluded to, Mike, you know, they want to be as open as possible. And it's not about that owners only get rung every Sunday with these great Sir Mark Prescott stories that we've heard time and time again. But actually, no, we can get cameras in stables and cameras on gallops. And you can, you know, if you're spending a significant chunk of change on having a horse in training, and statistically it's only running 4 times a year, you need, as Rod talked about, you need other spikes in there, such as mornings on the gallops or breakfast with your jockey and trainer, that you can sort of go down the local golf club and show off about. But it's the whole ego side of things of the leisure pound that we're spending. Moving that forward, and we start talking about the welfare side of things. I'm confident on a jump racing front. There's been some amazing things happen in the last 10 years, which actually did need to happen, as we would all admit, such as the changes to the fence in the Grand National. We had stalwarts, good friends of mine like John Frankham going, "You're going to ruin the race." No, we haven't. It's still fantastic. It's still the Grand National. And more of that welfare side. There will be focus on stick. We will get better at how we explain why a horse needs a stick. I ride out every day with a stick. You know, it's an aid to getting a horse to go faster. So we've got to explain it in a better way, be proud of what we've got. It's not just, when we talk about jump racing, it's not just us that's got jump racing. The person that emailed in was talking about, it was Bridget actually, was talking about other places like the US and Australia, where they're tiny little add-ons, smaller than point-to-pointing industries. You look at Ireland and you look at France and you look at us, three very powerful nations that have got huge national hunt industries within them, and it'll be a long, long time before there is any demise in that. But that's not to say we can rest on our laurels. We've still got to make sure our sport is protected and be proud of our sport.
Well said, Josh. I'll second that. But changing tack completely now, gents, we've got to move on. Let's move on to the media side of things, perhaps. Where do you see racing in 2025 as regards media? And obviously, it's already changed now. We're watching racing on our devices and computers, as well as our television, of course. And Ian from Berkshire on email says, any prospect, he says, of the two racing channels being incorporated into one, he'd be happy for either to have the sole rights. He doesn't mind, although he does say, Josh, he actually prefers Sky Racing. But I mean, listen, he might be a buddy of yours.
That's because you're on it, mate. Yeah.
Not that often. But it's an interesting point. I mean, particularly at the moment with the ITV contract still not quite fully put to bed, which is rather alarming for all of us, I think. But Rod, can I put this to you? How important is it that we maintain this coverage of the sport, which is unprecedented, the sort of coverage that we get, particularly of British sport and international here now?
I think it's hugely important. I think that racing is incredibly fortunate that on a weekly basis it reaches the sort of numbers that it does, and within those 52 weeks it has some really significant spikes when you think of our iconic race meetings. And for many people it's their one weekend date with the sport, and I think that fuels an awful lot of interest, certainly a lot of betting. It matters to sponsors that their brand is being seen and they are reaching people. It helps with the sports storyline. So I think our terrestrial coverage remains important all the time, that the sort of numbers on terrestrial dwarf those on digital channels. Then in relation to the digital channels, they also serve a purpose because they're specialist. They talk to a more committed and experienced audience by their very, very nature. In terms of the channels coming together, this is spoken about a lot in terms of economies of scale. And again, lots of people speculate on this. I would imagine that the upheaval we're about to endure over the next few years will probably inform that more than anything else.
Do you see the likes of, I don't know, would you see the likes of Ascot running its own race? And I mean, could you see Amazon, for example, broadcasting certain races, or would you see Google getting involved? I mean, how many people would be keen to broadcast horse racing with the UK out there, do you think, Josh?
Well, what was I'm sure was leaked the other day with a Tony McCoy piece, I think it was in The Sun. He's obviously been put into bat by ITV because I think, I don't really want to focus on the ITV contract as such, but obviously it was alluded to in there that we were going to put our crown jewels in one pot and sell, which means there are more people would be prepared to bid for that than a 52 weeks a year ITV contract. If you said, okay, you've got Royal Ascot, the Derby, the Grand National and Cheltenham, then you've got those people would obviously pitch up because they got high viewing figures, and then the rest be split between the channels. So that's why that piece was there, just to sort of underline that in terms of what ITV looks like. I think terrestrial is brilliant. I'm slightly nervous that we are still in a sort of a little bit dinosaur age in terms of talking about media, when media means data. You know, everyone was going around saying 4 million people watched the virtual Grand National. So what else do we know about these 4 million people? Where did they live? Where were the hotspots? What's their demographic? That's what sponsors want to know. They don't care what 4 million is. It might be 4 million people that have absolutely no interest in their product. So we need to know a lot more about what our customer base looks like, what they do, and what their activities are. So that's one in terms of data. How we consume it, I think we can make it a lot cooler, which I know Equine Productions, I know we're on their channel, but they try and do that. They go out with the likes of Jockey Cam. We still ride. Nathan Horrocks is one of the directors of EP, and him and I used to ride in the early 90s. We still pretty much ride in the same crash helmet as we did when we ride out in Lambourne tomorrow, as we did sort of 25, 30 years ago. Take a look at what they were driving in Formula One, and look, I would look like Sterling Moss in our little sort of helmets there 30 years ago, compared to the technology that is involved in a helmet now. So if you work out, and it makes the viewer experience even better. So if you had a jockey cam built into every helmet on every horse, you had what speed, using TPD data, what speed the horse is going, what its stride length is, what energy levels, you know, there's all this kind of stuff, which is like new age, brilliant, of our traditional lovely sport, but it's bringing it into the 21st century. And it's not rewriting the rule book here. This is looking at what other sports have then gone and taken. And we're not trying to do this 2020 quicker format and what have you. We're just trying to bring technology into our sport to make it more consuming for the younger viewer, as well as the middle-aged viewer, which I'd call ourselves.
Or by 2025, the older viewer, certainly.
I think that's absolutely right. That question often gets asked about, you know, what is racing 2020, and I think it's a bit of a red herring, because racing is inherently fast, exciting, and colourful. You know, how short do you want a race to be? So I think it's more about the add-ons around the core product than reinventing the product itself. I do worry about a dilution of racing's rights by them being sold to lots of different places and then losing that critical mass. And again, it's all about balance. But we saw cricket, for example, take some very, very big income from satellite broadcasters, but lost a lot of eyeballs on the sport, and with it, I think a lot of knowledge and engagement in that sport. And it was notable that when the ECB did a new deal around media rights, including the 100, it was a mixture of satellite broadcaster and terrestrial. They kind of recognised you need that balance of the money and the innovation that often the satellite broadcasters bring, but that, you know, that big mass marketing that a terrestrial platform brings as well. So it's as ever, it's all about balancing these things up.
It is, and I think that just to add in there, the final part, which we talked about earlier on when we were talking about the segmentation of the fixture list, and Rod talking about it, the Premier fixtures and sort of regional fixtures and whatever the sort of second tier fixtures are. I think we've seen over the last 10 years, and it's a pattern that's only going to increase once we're allowed to travel again, that racing is now, the world is a smaller place and we're becoming a true global sport. And I think in answers to the guy that emailed in terms of whether the two channels are going to come together, I think they will come together under one roof, whatever that's called. There'll be channels 1 and 2, which will include Irish racing. I think seeing the UK and Ireland makes it we saw the tote come together in the last couple of weeks in terms of the UK and Ireland. Gives us we've got the best product in the world between the two of us. And I think if you looked at a channel that was away from your Premier meetings, but actually a betting channel that had racing jumping off every 5 minutes around the globe. So you sort of South Africa or Australia in the night, South Africa into a Hong Kong, into our domestic product, into the East Coast in America, West Coast and around again, all betting into your local pool that goes into the domestic pool of where the horse racing is being taken place. You've then got a great betting product, which you then sit on top of your Premier, sits below your Premier product that Rod's been talking about, which is where your terrestrial TV comes in. It's like when the Champions League come to town. That looks very different to what your day-to-day betting product is, that the three of us want to go and do a play spot for the afternoon whilst we're having a game of golf.
Yeah.
If we're really being blue sky and talking about, you know, what we could look like in 5 years and what might be better. It would be great if the sport embraced technology in such a way that our younger users, who are all so comfortable and proficient as we are with these devices, can bet more easily and more quickly on horse racing. Josh referenced it earlier about racing kind of being a bit of a club and being a bit secretive. And I think the sport can be rather prescriptive towards outsiders in saying almost you have to enjoy it as we do, as opposed to saying enjoy it in any format you want to. And if you want a very, very simple race card on your phone that has very, very little data, but effectively has you making a choice about which thing you want to bet on very quickly, well, why not? If that engages someone in a market where that's how betting in other channels works now, racing should be taking its part in that. I still think we kind of have this kind of inherent view that everyone really needs to understand the detailed race card, and they don't.
Just to add to that, I looked on my Strava app, and you can do kilometres and miles, but furlongs doesn't come up. So I think we might have to change our language somewhat.
Yeah, well, this is it about racing having its own language. We talk about furlongs, etc., etc., and also the fact that horses are still sold in guineas, which I just don't understand at all. It's just straight from the 19th century. These are things I think we can improve upon and make it more transparent. I want to talk about race courses. There's going to be some race courses, I'm guessing, that might struggle to be around in 2025. Would you agree with that, gents?
I would, as a business owner myself, I'd love to. The racecourses are fortunate in a lot of ways that they get paid a certain amount of money to open up their doors, which a lot of businesses don't. But equally, needs must. It's also a false economy if you're getting cash before you even open up the door. So you've got to make sure that these things work. The horse population currently, I don't believe the fixture list is far too big for the horse population. And we could cut it down. The great quote from a good friend of the three of us, John Frankham again, what's the fun in biscuits if there's always biscuits in the tin? And I think there's far too much in terms of fixtures that are out there at the moment. We need to make this special. Every bit of research I've seen from Rod and his team and the like is it's a real special event when we go racing. But if that's going on the whole time, we've got to make sure that it's smaller could be beautiful. And unfortunately, if a race course isn't profitable, and we've seen some of the groups that carry around a lot of debt as well, I don't think we'll have 60 race courses in 5 years' time. I think it'll probably be nearer 50.
Yeah, Rod, I mean, you were at Northern Racing for a long time and group managing director there for the best part of, a decade and more even. What are your thoughts? Can you see some being vulnerable in 5 years' time before then?
I think in this current crisis, I think a lot of businesses, including race courses, will be vulnerable. A couple of points, very, very different ones. If you go back to sort of the pre-60s and the 100 years that predated that, many race courses, I think almost 100, I think, fell out of use during that period. We've had a remarkably calm, sustained period in the last few decades for race courses. So, under different circumstances, race courses and other businesses won't be immune to what's happening in the economic world. So you could argue that might be coming, because over a long part of history, you've seen many businesses disappear. But I think always being the optimist and not wanting to wish any business not to be operating, I think the opportunity for race courses to be sustainable is for that differentiation of product. And I think if businesses can trade in different ways and recognize what they're trading in, and work under different criteria, that's their best opportunity. The way the current fixture list and media rights and other things are structured is quite rigid, and maybe there's a different format where the less viable race courses can still race, but do so in such a way that they can be profitable and don't have the operational drain that they currently do.
That's an excellent point. We could talk about that for a long time, couldn't we? Moving across to sponsors in 2025, where do you see the next wave of sponsors, new sponsors coming in to help our sport?
Well, that's a very interesting one. Rod is a rights owner, and I suppose I'd probably class myself one as a sponsor, but then secondly as a data provider. And I think And it's just because I am a data provider, I know that, and I know what sponsors are looking at. And it isn't, come and look at my race course. Isn't this a lovely view from the box? And you can have your sign put over there, and it'll be on the TV for about 5 seconds as the horse flashes by. Then you can shake hands with the winning owner, and you can have a glass of champagne with him, and I'm going to charge you this amount of money for it. Gone are those days, because you can get most chief execs or marketing directors would be more interested in going to Twickenham or Lords, and we've got to make sure that we know more about what our eyeballs mean. We say, okay, we got all these people that watch the Grand National, we've got all these people. Who are these people? How do we get hold of them? You know, and I think the technology age, the viewers and the followers of the likes of Great British Racing, probably one of the most followed Twitter handles that we've got in the sport, knowing more about how we can contact these people and knowing more about their demographic profile will not only attract new sponsors, and will actually be seen as you know, as a, not cheap, but will definitely be seen as value once we start understanding a lot more about our customers compared to some of the higher premium sponsorships that are out there in the sporting world. But I'm going to hand over to the rights holder of Champions Day, our best flat racing day going, to tell me more.
Totally agree with Josh on the data point, and that's something that I've noticed happening more and more now, that the discussions we have with potential sponsors are about how they can reach very specific customers and what return on investment they can get. And so that kind of casual branded sponsorship where you bang up a few banners and have a hospitality box and tell your finance director that it's all okay, you've had some exposure, is less and less prevalent. It works at a local level, I have to say. There's a different kind of sponsorship around, I think, at a low local level, and that does work. And local, if you like, flag waving for companies will still be an important bread and butter income stream for a lot of tracks. But I think the other thing to touch upon is racing mustn't lose confidence in its luster. We've been around an awful long time. We're one of the oldest, if not the oldest sport, and there will always be at a high level interested in being associated with our premium events, be it the Grand National, be it the Gold Cup, be it Royal Ascot, be it the Derby. When you notice this, and Josh will know this because he travels extensively, overseas racing administrations look on us with great envy. That diversity of courses we have, that history we have, that history that we've got that others simply haven't got, is very attractive. And so I think protecting those key races and those key moments and those key festivals will be very important in maintaining sponsors who will always want to be a part of them. Our heritage remains incredibly attractive and sexy to people.
And I think just to add to that, if you look at two of the big people say, oh, well, the youngsters aren't into history and, you know, the monarchies, look at the state of the monarchy and all that kind of stuff. Look how many people watch The Crown, you know, look at The Darkest Hour, Winston Churchill, who was the man that bought the tote out. You know, it's definitely, you know, if we position this correctly, it has got traction with the younger viewer and the younger person that could consume our sport. We've just got to position it correctly. When we turn around and say we're just the sport of kings, it's very off-putting because the man in the street, that's not tangible for him. We've got to work out a way of, like the Crown did, of saying this will make it interesting, because we found it interesting because it was behind closed doors about really what it was like being the Queen as she grew up. So we've got to find that level of interest of how we position our sport to gain people to say it is the sport of kings, but this is how you can have your own piece of the sport of kings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you could almost picture us, if you like, as the original sport to people, which is much broader and more people might relate to that and like that authenticity. But yes, when we pitch it up here, a lot of people don't hear that message.
Well, but they do hear that message in Dubai and Qatar, Rod, don't they? Which is why we got you know, Kipco locked into big deals, long deals as well. Can you remind us when the Champions Series deal expires, Rod?
I can. I hope you're not going to ask me anything confidential because I won't be able to say. But yeah, it's until 2024, and we did an extension to that deal back in 2015, and Sheikh Farhad and Kipco have recently confirmed that recommitment to UK horse racing, which is fantastic. And one of the reasons is that they think that Great Britain stages the best racing in the world. at the best venues with the most famous and lustrous events. And so keeping that is absolutely crucial to get the types of sponsor like Kipco and others committed and interested in our sport.
It's a great job that Sheikh Fahad is such a young man as well. So we're hoping that the relationship with him will be a long and productive one. I'm going to change it slightly again now, fellas. Racing Post isn't publishing in a newspaper form right now. We hope that it will come back and do so when things have changed a bit. But do you see the media coverage of racing looking healthy in 2025?
That's all about being relevant, Mike, I think. And if we do our jobs correctly by finding out that who our eyeballs are, exactly what media will want to come and promote us, because they know that we've got a great audience there. Because we can't tell people what our audience are like. We can just turn around at the moment and say there was 5.8 million people that came racing last year, but we can't tell them who it is. Again, if the media understands that, but equally, I think we're all, the three of us are a bit traditionalist, thinking of a traditional newspaper. I have to say I haven't bought the Racing Post. I've read it since the day I came into this sport in 1990, but I now no longer consume it in its paper form. I get it on the iPad every night. It's not a problem, and I've still been getting it and still reading away while we've been in lockdown. So, is it the excuse that actually we don't see it come back? I don't know that for a fact, but there are a lot of newspapers out there that are properly considering whether they're going to go to the wall or not. And if the Racing Post, as we know, is funded predominantly by affiliate gaming money rather than the £3.80 or whatever it now costs as a daily thing in your newspaper shop.
Yeah, Rod, anything to comment on that?
I think racing is as Brian Kavanagh, the chief exec of Horse Racing Ireland, once said, one thing that British racing is world class at, unquestionably, is moaning. And I've never forgotten that. And we often bemoan what we've lost and don't actually look at what we've got. And whilst printed media coverage of racing has certainly reduced, and you haven't got the specialists around anymore in the regions even that you used to have, we're incredibly accessible. And if you think of the digital world now, there are any number of journalists and writers and bloggers that you can access. You can follow the likes of Simon Rowlands and get incredibly detailed sectional data from the likes of him and others. You can follow companies like GG Media, run by Matt Bisogno, who do excellent work and really engaging data on racing. So there's no shortage of opportunities to interact with the sport, and our cumulative coverage on social media, because we measure this, we reckon to be around 16 million, possibly peaking at 19 million this year of population. So racing is plenty accessible, and there's plenty of data you can get. But Josh makes the number one point about this: we need to be relevant and interesting.
Yeah,
Rod, just on a quick one on that, how does that compare? 16 million sounds a huge number. Is that comparable to where we are when we turn around and say we're the second most biggest spectator sport in the UK, or are we aligned with sort of a rugby on that level? How do we put that into? How can we tangibly look at that?
They're really good questions. If you look at social media platforms in the UK, football's a different universe. So forget football. By any measurement, all other sport compares terribly to football right now. That might change in the next 5 years, of course. We compare very favourably to the likes of cricket and rugby. Cricket has a stronger international following on social media, unsurprisingly. But in terms of UK following, we're on par with those other rugby and cricket sports.
Which I think is a fair shout. Do you think that, Mike?
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And you cannot even begin to start comparing to football or because it's so far out there, isn't it? It's way ahead of us and always will be. I mean, in conclusion, gents, before we've got to wrap this up, we've been going almost an hour now. It's been fascinating chat. We could go on for another hour, I'm sure. But would you be both? I know you would be, Rod, but would you, Josh, be reasonably optimistic that the British racing in 2025 would be an upbeat and healthy situation?
I see it as my job to make sure that it is.
Yeah, well, yeah,
and that's what I do. I get up every morning, and that's what I try to, and I include Rod in this as well. We've been working alongside each other in this sport for far too long, probably 2 or 3 decades now, and in various different roles, but with the same goal in mind, is what we pass on to the next generation. We want to be strong, healthy, and ready to move with the times. And trying to move something that's been around for a long, long time is difficult, and it can sometimes hurt, and it roll back and crush you a little bit, but we still get back and start moving it forward. And I think we're getting the right people in the sport now. Dare I say that the politics are starting to, when people are struggling a bit, the politics go out the window a bit and say, how can I help the next man, and how can they help me? And I really hope that if we have to go through this recession, which I think you're right that we will go through, I actually think that we'll realise that we're all a bit the same, and we can all help each other with just a hand on the shoulder would be a lot better than a battle in the boardroom.
And Rod, final words from you, please, before we go.
I think an economic crisis of this scale will ruthlessly root out anything that's inefficient and unprofitable. That's a matter of fact across all businesses. So there will be change. But I think if we return to kind of where we were before this crisis started, racing is still the second best attended sport after football. It's every week on terrestrial TV. It has 2 digital channels, a daily newspaper. It's supported in 2 very different ways by very, very passionate owners and incredibly passionate punters. So we have still all the ingredients to be relevant going forward. There will still be customers to promote to. There will still be opportunity. And Josh is absolutely on the money here. There is nothing like a burning platform to focus people's minds and get them coming together. So we should always look forward at the opportunities whilst recognising the challenges we face, Mike.
Good stuff, Rod, and great stuff from both gents, Josh and Rod. Really appreciate your time as always. Great to chat to you both, 2 men that see something good coming out of this rather urgent, bleak landscape at the moment. But what I can say is,
you and I have worked together. You and I have worked together on many occasions, Mike. But in all these years, this is the first time I've ever appeared with Josh.
No kidding. There you go. Well, we'll do it again sometime. Why don't we do it again? Yeah. I tell you what, though, neither of you have been on the Furlong Factor. I know that, but I wouldn't be holding my bets about you not appearing at some stage. Tomorrow at 1 p.m, we've got a Furlong Factor special. Ali Vance talking to Gemma Waterhouse from Racing Welfare, and Luke Harvey as well, who's been promoting all this fantastic entertainment. Some of the finalists ahead of Saturday's big final tomorrow at 1 p.m. here on EPTV. Thanks to those of you that have been watching and contributing as well with emails and suggestions. Really appreciate it. And until the next time, stay safe. And thank you again to Josh and to Rod. And we'll see you all soon.
Bye all.